I've lived long enough to watch money behave a bit like a rubber band. It stretches quietly for years and then snaps back without warning. People talk about collapse as if it's a cliff, a sudden drop in the night. In my experience, currencies don't usually jump off cliffs. They erode like a shoreline, inch by inch, until one day you notice the fence is closer to the water than you remember. The fear you feel right now is not a flaw in your character. It's your mind trying to protect your future self. Let's sit with that for a moment. Breathe. Then let's talk about assets that don't panic, even when the dollar does. In my 9th decade, I've seen enough cycles to stop being surprised by them. I watched prices in the 1,970 seconds make fools of budgeters and heroes of the patient. I saw the dot-com era promise a new financial physics and the housing boom pretend that trees and condos could grow to the sky. I've seen oil at a painful high and an impossible low. And I've seen the quiet investor, the one who looked a little boring to everyone at the party, end up with dignity when the music stopped. I've made mistakes with hedges that felt clever and trades that looked smart on paper. I've also watched a handful of simple decisions compound into an unshakable foundation. Experience teaches you how to stand still when everyone else is sprinting toward the next shiny exit sign. Here's the part most people won't tell you because it doesn't sell as many newsletters. Your anxiety is reasonable. If you've noticed that $100 in your wallet buys less than it used to, that's not your imagination playing tricks. If you're unsure which assets actually protect you in a currency storm, you're not alone. Even very bright people get confused here. We all have a bias toward what we can see and touch. Cash feels safe because it sits still. It doesn't wiggle. A number in your bank account is a soothing thing, like a nightlight. But the quiet tax of inflation doesn't care how calm a number looks. On the other side, we have assets that are loud and volatile, and that noise scares people away from the very things that build real resilience. Then the internet adds its own orchestra of panic and certainty, and you're left wondering if the right plan is to buy gold, a bunker, and 6 pallets of canned beans. Let's reframe this before we move any further. The goal is not to predict a collapse. The goal is to own things that don't need a prediction. Wealth is not a big number. Wealth is the ability to buy the same basket of life tomorrow, 10 years from now, and 30 years from now, without begging anyone for permission. Freedom isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in purchasing power. And purchasing power comes from owning claims on real stuff and real cash flows. Dollars are just the measuring tape. If the tape stretches, you want assets that can stretch with it. People often ask me, what should I buy if the dollar falls? The answer is usually a little disappointing because it's not exotic. You prepare for a weak currency the same way you prepare for most storms, by owning what the storm cannot permanently break. Think of businesses that can reprice their products, real estate whose rents reset, land that feeds people, assets that are scarce, and resources the world needs, whether the dollar is strong or weak. This isn't clever math, it's boring math. And boring math is what makes people wealthy. Let's do a little of that boring math together. Use the rule of 72. At 3% annual inflation, your money's purchasing power halves in roughly 24 years. At 6%, it halves in about 12. If groceries cost $100 today and inflation averages 4% for a decade, that basket creeps to around $148. No headline, no panic, just drift. Now flip the lens. If you own an asset whose cash flows grow at 7% a year, those cash flows double in about 10 years. An asset that raises its dividend from $1 to $2 over a decade looks modest on a chart, but that extra dollar buys back what inflation tried to steal. If your assets grow faster than your costs, you don't have to predict currency moves. You simply outgrow them. Opportunity cost is the part most people miss. That same $100 left in cash at 0% interest over a decade is not neutral. It's quietly walking backward. If that $100 sat in a plain, dividend-growing business compounding at 8%, in 10 years it would be about $216. In 20 years, roughly $466. The math isn't wow, it's steady. And steady is what pays the grocery bill after the noise dies down. With that mindset in place, let me show you 5 kinds of assets that have a habit of thriving when the dollar looks fragile. I'm not handing you a shopping list. I'm handing you 5 ways to think about permanence in a world where the measuring tape stretches. The first is productive businesses with pricing power. Not exciting businesses, essential ones. The company that sells aspirin and soap, the one that runs the rails and moves grain. The utility-like service that charges a toll every time you swipe your card or use a pipe. When the unit of account weakens, the ability to raise prices without losing customers is gold, sometimes better than gold, because it comes with cash flow attached. In the 1,970 seconds, a small tool supplier I invested in raised prices 4 times in 3 years. It felt impolite, but contractors kept buying because their projects couldn't stop. The brand was trusted, replacements would have slowed them down, and the extra expense was a drip in a much larger bucket. That's pricing power. These businesses are often global too. They sell toothpaste in dollars, euros, pesos, and rupees. When a local currency stumbles, they adjust. And while they adjust, they keep paying dividends. Let's put some numbers on it. If a business earns a 15% return on capital and can reinvest half of its profits at similar returns, it can plausibly grow earnings around 7–8% a year. If it pays a 2–3% dividend that grows with it, you're looking at 9–11% total returns over time. Not every year, not clean. But over a decade or two, that sort of compounding outruns 3–5% inflation and builds a buffer against worse. A $1 dividend growing at 7% becomes about $3.87 in 20 years. That's the kind of boring growth that makes panic optional. The trick is not to chase the hottest story. It's to own businesses that sell necessities, hold a moat, and don't require heroic forecasts to justify their price. Index funds, holding a wide collection of such businesses, can do the job if you don't want to choose individuals. Just remember, you're buying claims on global earnings, not a lottery ticket. The second asset is cash-flowing real estate financed with long-term, fixed-rate debt. Most people focus on the building. In a currency storm, the magic is in the mortgage. When you borrow at a fixed rate for 30 years and inflation runs hotter than that rate, you are quietly paying back yesterday's dollars with tomorrow's cheaper ones. Meanwhile, rents tend to reset. Not every month, not without friction, but over time, leases catch up. A plain apartment building in a decent neighborhood with steady demand and responsible management can be a wonderful hedge precisely because it looks boring on a brochure. Let's make it tangible. Suppose you buy a small property for $300,000 with 20% down. You take a fixed-rate mortgage at 3.5% back when money was still sleepy. Your payment might be around $1,300 a month. If inflation runs at 4–5% for a while, that $1,300 stays the same number, but it becomes smaller in its bite. Your rents, starting at $1,800, might rise to $2,200, then $2,500 over several years. The spread widens, slowly at first, then noticeably. Maintenance and taxes go up too, yes, but well-chosen properties in cities with job growth and constrained supply tend to carry rent increases that more than keep pace. That's how a little operator makes headway even as the currency stumbles. The risk is leverage. Greedy leverage breaks things. Patient leverage builds quiet wealth. Keep your loan-to-value sensible, your reserves fat, and your ego thin. This is not flipping houses for a quick score. This is buying a utility-like stream of payments and letting time lay down the bricks. Third on my list is farmland and timberland, productive land. It sounds romantic, and it isn't. It's a business. But it's a business that plugs into the oldest line item in the human budget: food, then shelter. Productive farmland throws off cash every harvest, either directly from crops or from a tenant's rent, and its value tends to track the prices of what it grows, which are themselves tied to global supply and demand. When the measuring tape stretches, the price per bushel and the price per acre usually stretch with it. Timber is even stranger to modern investors because its inventory grows on its own. If lumber prices are weak, you can leave trees on the stump and let them fatten up another season or two. You can't do that with steel. You can do that with pines. A farmer friend of mine likes to say, "The land pays me whether I look at the screen or not." He's earned about 3–5% cash yield through rents and operations most years, with long stretches where the underlying land simply rose with the cost of everything else. Over decades, total returns of 6–9% have been common for quality farmland, depending on where and how it's managed. It's not instantly liquid. It won't double overnight. But it doesn't break when a central bank blinks. For those who can't buy a field, there are publicly traded REITs and partnerships that own farmland or timberland. They're not perfect proxies. They add market noise, but they can carry the essence. Productive acres that feed and shelter people in any currency. The fourth asset is precious metals, particularly gold. Gold is a strange creature in modern portfolios because it does nothing and won't apologize for it. There's no cash flow, no quarterly report. It just sits there, inert, a mirror to your patience. That's the whole point. In a world measured in IOUs, gold is one of the few assets that is no one's liability. When trust in the fabric weakens, when people stop believing the promise embedded in a piece of paper, gold's habit is to reprice that disbelief. It's not a growth engine, it is an insurance policy. And like insurance, you hope it never has to work hard. I keep a small allocation, and I don't fuss with it. 5 or 10% is enough for most sober plans. More than that and you're praying for a fire to justify the insurance. If you ever find yourself rooting for chaos so that your allocation makes you look smart, you've wandered into a dark room. There's a story from my father's generation. One gold coin used to buy a good suit when he was young. It still buys a good suit now. That's purchasing power. It doesn't grow your estate, but it preserves a slice of it across regimes. Silver is more volatile, more industrial. It dances to a less predictable rhythm. For a core ballast against currency mischief, the yellow metal does its job quietly. Number 5 is energy and essential commodities, the stuff the world needs to move, warm, build, and feed itself. Oil and natural gas, copper, fertilizer. Not as a bet on a particular headline, but as a recognition that human progress is hungry, and we haven't invented a world where electrons and molecules are optional. Commodities are priced globally. When the dollar weakens, their dollar price tends to rise. But owning raw commodities is hard. Futures roll costs, storage, contango, those are headaches. The way I've slept at night is by owning low-cost producers with conservative balance sheets, and sometimes the toll-takers in the middle pipelines and midstream companies that charge a fee per barrel moved. They don't care much about the price of oil. They care about volume and time. These businesses can return capital through dividends and buybacks, while the underlying commodity reprices to reflect currency weakness. The key here is humility. Commodity cycles will make a liar out of your calendar. Keep position sizes in check and focus on the players who can survive droughts without desperate financing. Now, that's the list. But the list means very little if you don't understand the psychology that ruins it. People fail here for emotional reasons, not intellectual ones. Fear of volatility pushes them into assets that are stable in price, but unstable in value. A high-yield savings account feels safe because the number goes up each month. But if that 4% yield is running under 6% inflation, you're losing quietly while feeling clever. On the other hand, the equity of a boring toothpaste company might swing 15% in a bad month, but if it keeps raising prices and dividends, it's healing the real wound, even as it looks like it's bleeding. Ego makes it worse. We want to outsmart the system with exotic hedges and perfect timing. I've seen smart folks move all to cash, wait for the crash, and then never get back in because the headlines never feel safe enough. I've seen others chase collectibles and trinkets that look hedge-like until the day they discover that not many people actually want to buy a luxury watch in a recession. I remember a neighbor who put his life savings into a hot, hard asset fund right before a correction, swore off markets entirely, and missed the next decade of compounding that would have made him free. The math doesn't care that he was right for 3 months. It offered him an opportunity for 30 years. He said no because 3 months hurt his pride. Let me bring this back to simple principles embedded in the 5 assets. Own claims on cash flows that can adjust to the currency, not assets that need a forecast to work. The toothpaste company, the rail, the midstream pipeline, the apartment building, these are businesses that look at the measuring tape each year and adjust the price of the product or the rent. They are not beggars to the tape, they're negotiators. Use fixed-rate debt like a tool, not a drug. A 30-year fixed mortgage at a rate below inflation turns debt into a partner. Each payment you make is the same number but a smaller bite of your future income. It's like agreeing with your present self to do your future self a favor, and then letting inflation keep its end of the bargain. Prefer productive land to shiny stories. If you want to sleep in any currency, it helps to own a patch of earth that feeds someone or houses them. You don't have to be a farmer. You have to respect the math of scarcity and the slow, dependable cash flows of real use. Treat gold as a seatbelt. You don't drive faster because you have one. You buckle it and hope to never need it. Then you keep driving your plan. Remember that energy and materials power the real economy. A society that wants to build, travel, heat, cool, and digitize doesn't get to choose whether it uses resources. It only chooses which mix, and that transition takes decades. Owning durable claims on that demand is a sober hedge, not a celebration of turmoil. Now, people like to ask, what about foreign currencies? Should I hold euros, yen, or Swiss francs to hedge the dollar? You can, but I've found that owning global businesses is a simpler way to own foreign currency exposure without having to keep a currency cheat sheet. The multinational that sells soap in 50 countries is effectively a basket of currency claims wrapped in a single ticker. It invoices, collects, and reports in multiple units. The accountants translate for you while the business does what it has done for a century, solves small daily problems for 1 billion customers. There's also a temptation to get cute with timing. I'll buy gold when it dips. I'll rotate into energy when I see the headline. I'll wait for the house down the street to drop 10%. Timing is a sugar high. You feel brilliant for a day and groggy for a decade. The long-term investor builds a core, lets these assets do their work, and only adjusts on the margins. Rebalancing is a humble way to sell a little of what ran too hot and add to what's been left behind, without pretending to be a fortune teller. Let's not ignore risk. Real estate can be overbuilt or overtaxed. Commodities can crash. Gold can drift sideways for years. Businesses can stumble. There is no perfect shelter. There is only a portfolio that leans into reality and away from stories. You offset the lumpiness of these assets by spreading your bets, avoiding leverage you can't sleep with, and, most importantly, keeping your personal expenses reasonable. A low burn rate is the best hedge against everything. Freedom equals passive income greater than your expenses. You can change either side of that equation. The side you control most is your spending. In every currency regime I've lived through, the families who ran lean had options. The families who ran hot were forced to sell their best assets to cover their habits. Don't be forced to sell. That's the quiet difference between a bump in the road and a disaster. Let me take you forward, because long-term thinking only matters if it paints a picture you can feel. Imagine it's 20 years from now. The dollar might be stronger or weaker. The headlines will be different, but the music will be familiar. In your world, dividends from everyday businesses deposit without fanfare. The rents from a modest property cover groceries and utilities. A farmland REIT spins off cash that replaces a part of your paycheck you no longer have to earn. A small slice of gold sits where you can find it. A reminder that you don't need to be anyone's debtor to be okay. Your exposure to energy and essential materials means that when the cost of building and moving goes up, you're not on the outside looking in. You didn't time any of it perfectly. You didn't need to. You simply positioned yourself so that the real economy, messy, loud, imperfect, had to pay you to exist. You wake up and make coffee at home because you like your kitchen, not because you can't afford a cafe. You don't refresh your portfolio every hour because you understand that big money is made in the waiting. The people you love don't experience you as the person who's always tense about the next financial shock. They experience you as present, and present is the one currency that never collapses. Maybe you still worry now and then. That's fine. Respect is healthy. Panic is not. When you respect the storm, you check the roof and the windows. When you panic, you sell the house for a loss because tomorrow looks windy. One is a plan, the other is an impulse. I want to share one last story, because these lessons are always easier to stay faithful to when they're anchored to a person. In the early 1980 seconds, a neighbor of mine bought a small 4-unit building with a fixed-rate mortgage that people called expensive at the time, because rates were high and it felt like the wrong moment. He kept his day job. He resisted the itch to repaint every year. He treated tenants like humans and raised rents slowly and fairly. For decades, he did very little that made for a good cocktail party story. Meanwhile, inflation did what inflation does. It made his mortgage payments smaller in real terms. Rents crept up. The building appreciated as the city grew. By the time he retired, one side of the ledger, his expenses, was small and predictable. The other side, his incoming rents, was larger and rising. He never owned a yacht. He never won big. He simply made panic optional, for himself and for his family. That is the point. Not bragging rights, not a viral moment. Dignity. If you take nothing else from this, take the idea that what thrives in a currency storm is usually not the loudest asset. It's the one you almost forget to check, because you know what it sells, who it serves, and why that will matter in any regime. Businesses with pricing power, real estate with fixed-rate debt, productive land, a quiet slice of gold, energy and materials that the world demands regardless of mood. Hold them in proportions that let you sleep, not in amounts that make you a philosopher. If this way of thinking resonates with you, you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing to Quiet Wealth. No pressure. This is a place for people who prefer patience over noise. I'll leave you with a final thought. The loudest voices will always promise urgency, now or never. Last chance. Ignore them. There is no last chance to do the right thing for your future. There is only the quiet discipline to do it again today. Wealth, built on that kind of discipline, doesn't worry much about the measuring tape. It keeps stacking claims on reality, one boring decision at a time. And when the tape stretches, as it always does, Those claims stretch with it. That's how you outlast panics without becoming a panicked person. That's how you build quiet wealth.